Welcome to the Goddess Keys, where we blur the lines between what is truth and what is fiction. And I want to talk a little bit about archetypes and go into archetypes in more depth. And today's archetype is the game maker. The game maker is very strategic. The game maker is somebody who plans things out years, decades ahead. They're very methodical. They're not just thinking about one particular scene or scenario. They are managing a variety of different scenes, scenarios, and factors, and they're very calculating with how they plan and strategize. Game makers are very crafty. Game makers get into this kind of trickster archetype. They transcend polarity, and yet a game maker plays on polarity. Well, let's take an example of one of the most obvious examples would be the Hunger Games. Okay, the Hunger Games has that game maker who is strategizing all of these weird survivor type scenarios that he's putting of the tributes through. And it's a good movie to watch to solidify this concept of the game maker. If you notice, he doesn't really smile a lot. He's very calculating. And he kind of is running the show in the background. So even though you might have like the president or the prime minister and all that sort of stuff, it's the game maker who's behind the scenes pulling the strings. The game maker does not really want to be seen. They don't really care about fame. They're more interested in power and control. Okay, so they like to kind of stay in the background. They like to stay mysterious, because when they're a little bit more mysterious, they're very much more in their power, right? Because you don't really see them coming. And then, of course, you have your Westworld, which I've shared a few times, that show Westworld. And you can kind of look at the folks behind the scenes. Once again, they're very much in the backdrop, right? So the people who are being controlled by the game maker, they don't know the names of the game makers because they're not supposed to. So the people that they do think are the quote bad guys are usually just another character within the game, but they're not the actual creator or strategist, okay? Now, another archetype around game makers, which I think is important to note, and a lot of times I'm not really seeing the connection made, but I was actually just watching a movie last night called Along Came a Spider with Morgan Freeman. It's not very good, but anyways, I kind of was just got an inspiration to watch it as I was trying to contextualize this concept of game maker. And serial killers are game makers, if you really think about it. A serial killer doesn't just want to kill. Serial killers need to make a game out of it. They need to create a lot of strategy around it. They also play a lot with polarity, okay? They have a certain type that they usually go for. And usually for some reason, the type that they target in their strategy to kill is usually a very specific type based upon a polarizing experience that they had within maybe their childhood or upbringing or some unresolved issue, okay? But they usually have an archetype that they go for. So it's not really a crime of passion. It's more of a crime of calculation. And they turn this crime, this very serious thing, polarity, right? What's more serious than murder? But then they turn it into a game. You see how we're playing with polarity again? So the serial killer is another archetype to look at as you're looking into game maker. Now, we utilize archetypes here at the Goddess Keys not to become the thing in the sense of that's now our identity. But the more we're able to step into the shoes of different archetypes, the more we're able to cultivate a life on our terms. Because if you're able to step into the shoes of the game maker, you step out of polarity. In order to step into the archetype of game maker, you need to step out of your role. So no matter how polarizing the situation is, you might be in a weird victimizer program or something like that. But what if for 1 week you viewed that particular issue or this life drama that you've been playing out? Maybe it's been a continuous loop for you, but for 1 week, what if you examined this situation more as a game maker. Okay? And this really does mean stepping out of character, having time to reflect. Because a lot of times if you're in the role and you're in this like weird looping thing, right? You're just gonna keep looping, and then the whole energy harvesting thing happens. You're getting caught up in your emotions and all of that kind of stuff. And then you're gonna revert more to type when you do that. You're not gonna necessarily be able to make any big shifts or seismic changes if you stay in character. But if you learn from the game maker, step out of character, step out of your role, look at things from a more long-term strategy sort of way, and look at the power plays and all of the dynamics that are impacting your situation, you might be able to make a move that maybe in the moment might not seem the most prudent or the most, quote, reasonable or logical, but maybe you step out of character and plan for the long term. Okay, that's a game maker kind of role. If you are resonating with this idea of life being simulated, right, and this blurs the lines between truth and fiction, but we know that a lot of times that media, movies, art, or impacts our lives greatly. So if we go upon this analogy of life being a game or a game board, it might be a really cool power move for you to try on the shoes of game maker. That might feel really weird to you. You might not even feel like you're allowed or have permission to even step into that role. So there's a lot of alchemizing to do even with that, okay? And if we take game maker to be like serial killer kind of thing, you know, that's a really extreme example, but we all have these Nemesis scripts that we're running in our lives, like good versus evil, good guy versus bad guy. You think about a serial killer and like a detective that really wants to get this guy. A movie that comes to mind is Face Off. Face Off with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. And, you know, in this, Nicolas Cage is the, quote, bad guy. John Travolta is the, quote, good guy, but they end up switching faces and literally they become each other. And there's this weird psychological element and aspect to that because of that face switch. So literally they're stepping into each other's lives. They're stepping into each other's shoes. And there is an alchemy in that. There's an alchemy sometimes in stepping into the shoes of your nemesis and becoming your nemesis. And, you know, this is where we blur the lines of polarity, because if you become the thing, it breaks the power from having an effect and an impact over you. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to fully embody that thing, but to see yourself not as separate from that aspect, okay, and to see similarity. It can be a power move because it can shift your algorithm sometimes, and it can shift this person to where maybe you're not really an opponent for them anymore, because a lot of times these nemesis programs run off of polarity. But if you become the thing, there's no polarity, and so it's not as much of a game. So you kind of sometimes nullify that script or nullify that game if you become the nemesis. And so that's some pretty interesting type of alchemy. If you're interested in learning more about archetypes and how to alchemize some life scripts that might be keeping you a little bit stuck, check me out on Patreon and on Bandcamp, where I have lots of great resources, or you can check me out on Ko-Fi and book a reading. That is what we're gonna talk about today in terms of archetypes, the game maker. And I just put a post up on Patreon with more information about this. But yeah, sending you lots of love, joy, and peace until we meet again. Bye.